So, we've talked about, case selection for 0 to 100. What are some common pitfalls that people will run into when they're trying to do these first 100 arches? What's going to slow them down? What's going to frustrate them? What are the problems that they maybe don't see coming after, listening to the Fix podcast and watching surgeries and shadowing? What are some things we can do to kind of hedge against that?
Yeah, some of the things that I see is they will under-reduce on the alveoplasty, or they will over-reduce, It's kind of like finding that like good, balance.
Goldilocks zone.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of, mentioned like, hey, on your average dentate patient, you're going to take away 3, 4, 5 millimeters of bone, right, for an FP3. And, you'll see the guy who like only hears that in clinic, right. Or in the course. And then he rolls into the cadaver, and he gets an edentulous patient and just, whacked all the bone away. And he's like, oh, I thought you said take away 5 millimeters of bone. It's like, we got to think on this, right? Like why are we taking the bone away? Right. And then the patient's got a denture base, like 20 millimeters thick. Right. And, so over reducing bone, thinking that everything applies, to every type of situation that you get involved in. So under reducing, over reducing, and really the big thing that I see a lot is people are when they're drilling, it's like, that they've got the foot on the pedal as hard as it goes, and it's going like 1,000 miles an hour before they even put it into the socket, right? And it's bouncing all around. And then they finally get it in the hole, and they're like, oh, thank goodness I got this in the hole. Okay, now let's just get it all the way down, And they're not even feeling, right? They're only caring at that point about depth. They've forgotten about, medial and buccal and, lingual angles. And, now it's just like depth, right? But then they're not feeling the bone, and then they're overcooking the bone. And that's the thing, right? Like being able to feather your drill is a huge step. Is a huge step. You probably won't get that until you're 250 and up. Just kind of being able to feather that drill, like, hey, I'm just gonna turn this drill at 50 RPMs, or I'm gonna turn this drill at 2,000.
That's good.
For sure.
Soren,
Yes.
you got a point.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention something about the over reducing, under reducing. Just a quick tip that I'd recommend for people in this 0 to 100 arch range. If you are doing, 0 to 100, I think that this is kind of a controversial topic because there is so much, digital workflow kind of propaganda out right now. And I do a partial digital protocol. So, I totally understand. But I think, Clark, you still do all your cases in analog, correct?
Yeah, we do all of our cases analog.
So if you're doing, go ahead.
Yeah, we have experimented with the digital workflow. To me, it's kind of like what works in your hands, right? And I like being able to have like that little trough. I like to kind of know where the teeth are, where the teeth are designed. So I want like a guide to go in, and I don't want to have to deal with impressions. I don't want to have to deal with photogrammetry. Hey, we can't get the pterygoid, or we can't get this scan or that, or then you get all frustrated, right? Like then that's the stressful.
Software is not working.
Yeah, I mean I can't tell you how many times I have all the stuff, right? Like we've got iTero, Trios, I've got PIC, I've got iCam. All those stuff has problems, right? Like all of a sudden randomly your stupid cord to the little scanner goes out, right? Or your assistant that always damages, your assistants are always out to get you, or they break your laptop screen right when you're rolling in, and you're like, this is the only way I can do this case, right? Like the only way I can do this is digital, and we got to send it to the lab and then print it. Or worse, you do prints. Like I know doctors that'll print 2 at the same time, use 2 printers, because if it falls off the damn printer, you know, it takes longer. I mean, printing's coming faster, right? But I don't know. I mean, to me, you know, I'm using this really cool system now called NeoConvert. It's like the smart denture. It's very similar to that. It's just more affordable on the NeoConvert side. And, you know, we'll just kind of zip through a case, and then by the time I've sutured, right, like, so I've had to deal with no photogrammetry, no impressions, no, you know, intraoral scanning, no placement of fiducials, right? So take all that out of the equation, and it takes 5 minutes to screw, or maybe 3 to screw on, you know, your 12 NeoConvert caps. And then we take their denture, you know, load it up with acrylic, boom, lock them down, snap it out. So literally 10 minutes, right? And we're done. And there was no stress of we can't get this scan, this wasn't working, you know, because then all the time, then you add all this equipment into your surgery room, and it's like, oh, we got our, you know, scanner here, we got, you know, micron mapper, we got this, we got, you know, all the stuff. It's a lot, and then your anesthesiologist is sitting in the corner being like, man, there's barely room for me, you know. So that's just kind of me, you know.
Yeah. No, I totally understand. I think if you're in that 0 to 100 arch range, I think, you know, analog is just a great way to get a lot of the basics down, and it's an easy way to start kind of like entering into the space, right? So you don't need to spend $30,000 on a micron mapper. You don't need to spend, you know, $20K on your scanning and laptop setup, and then it's another $15K for the full digital suite to print the arches, right? If you just want to get going in it and you want to give it a try, I think analog is a great approach. And when you start, right, you're talking about over reduction, under reduction. Get a denture made. If you don't have a lab tech in your office and you're outsourcing your dentures, get 2 dentures made. Get one and a duplicate. That way you can do the guide yourself. It's not hard to make a guide. You just measure from the incisal edge to 15 millimeters. You can cut that off in blocks or the whole thing in the front, and then you just make a trough behind the teeth. I like to go from, you know, you can do second pre or even all the way to the molar, and make it wide enough that you can fit your multi-unit pickups, whatever you want to call them, multi-unit like pickup pieces, to go through it. And then you have a reduction guide where if your patient is a dentulate, you can just stick that on and see exactly where your reduction line should go. If your patient is dentate, you can do the same thing and just double check it after you take all the teeth out or after you reflect your flap. Clark talked about this earlier pretty quickly, but he likes to do a mark across the whole arch. You know, do you do 13 millimeters, like right a little bit short of 15? For your line that you're gonna trough through and then in between all the teeth.
No, I just do you know, a 702, so it's 3 millimeters. So I don't mark, but I do a 3 millimeter trough. You know, mesial, buccal, distal, and then pop the teeth out. You know, they come out in 5 seconds, and then, you know, then I'll do my reduction. Typically, you know, I don't know, I eyeball it. And, you know, when you've done, you know, 3,000 cases under your belt or whatever, you know, you can, and you just know, right? So landmarks I'm looking for, can I pull the palate, you know, to the buccal edge, right? That looks like that's, if I can't, that's a red flag for me. Like, hey, you know, take some more bone off, or maybe you're kind of sloped, right? And the palate edge of the alveolus needs to be further reduced. So I want to know, you know, in the molar region, you know, can I pull that palate all the way over to touch that, you know, buccal of the maxillary alveolus?
You're talking about the tissue, the palatal
tissue, right? So if I can't, that's a red flag. And then I take the denture, I score in the denture itself, and then, you know, then I put it in the mouth. So the denture's scored, and I'll send you. You guys can upload a picture now.
Yeah.
So then, and you can kind of measure that. Like you said, 15 millimeters from the incisal edge. So yeah, I would say you would start your cutting at 13. So then you've got your 15.
Right.
And then I put that in, and then if I see any bone through those windows, then that lets me know, hey, I need to reduce more. So
and I think
great way. So I check it, by only doing half the mouth first, right? Yeah. And then when I do the other side, I still leave, right between 8 and 9 in that whole palatal area, so I can always go back and measure. And then, we're looking at Frankfurt horizontal, make sure that, it's not canted and stuff like that. So I've got 3 checks. One is, did I reduce 5 millimeters in a dentate patient? And then I can, basically fit the burr, and it's like even on both sides, right? I use like a 5 millimeter round burr. Can I pull the palatal tissue, and does it touch that buccal line angle of the maxillary alveolus? And then I can, put in the scored prosthesis.
Scored denture.
Because there's nothing worse than having to redo that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, definitely for the 0 to 100 segment, having redundant references and verifications for your alveo is extremely important. Because you don't want to be redoing any of those first 100 within a short period of time. If it's your first 100, you don't get to count it for your next 100. Yeah, right. It's just a redo. So another one that I don't think we've mentioned yet, but I know at least Soren uses it as much or more than I do, is once you've taken the teeth out, usually you're saving your centrals and you're saving your canines, and provided you get them out in one piece, after you've done your alveo, or even during, for a reference, you can put it back in the socket, and then you're able to actually measure from your incisal edge to where your bone level is at. So that's another good one. Also, preoperatively in your CT, once you've decided on your alveo line, you can figure out how deep certain sockets should be when your alveo is done. And it's not all cookie cutter either, right? It's not all just like 5 millimeters in every patient, just like you were talking about, people that go to your cadaver courses, they're just raising bone every time. This all has to correspond to the smile line, right? The minimum of how much we need to reduce for FP3 is going to be 15, but also if someone has a higher smile line, we want to take wherever that lip is in relation to our planned incisal edge, and we want to add another 2 to 3 millimeters just to make sure we've hidden that transition line. And that can all be coordinate with the denture that you talked about, scoring that, trying it in the mouth, measuring from the incisal edge to some future crestal level prior to taking the teeth out, or even after. If you put it back in, you can measure, and those teeth can also serve as a reference to where those teeth are going to be, and so you can kind of figure out your angulation of your drills, especially in the anterior, to make sure you're not coming out super, super palatal and having a really thick prosthesis in the anterior. So, say all that to say, have multiple ways to check these things. You never know when something might not be quite as useful as a reference as you would hope. And so just having all these different things in your toolkit to make sure that you've reduced adequately is going to save you a world of headache. It's one of the worst cases you'll ever do is the one that you already did. And now you have to go back in and undo all of your work. And now you have yourself your very own homegrown revision case. It's just one of the worst mistakes that you can make in full arch dentistry is under or over reduction.
I think it's super common
add,
too.
Sorry, I would.
Yeah, it's very common.
I would add to cases to avoid for the under 100 high smile line.
Yeah. Totally.
Also, a gull wing lip. Okay, right. So, a gull wing lip is like that Mercedes where you got the gull wing where it really rides high.
The corners get high.
Yeah, corners get really high. So like you can look at 8 and 9 and you're like, hey, that's fine. But then when you're like, hey, around 13 and 14 area, it's like, there's a lot of gingiva here, right?
Yeah.
And a warning sign is if you see the mucogingival junction, you're going to have a problem. Okay.
Yeah. There's nowhere else to go. Yeah.
So that would be smiling with exposed mucogingival junction in the posterior needs to be relative. Or absolute contraindication for anybody under like 250 arches.
That's great. And we can talk about how to manage that once you're 250 plus as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. Well, I think that's actually a pretty decent transition into getting into the more advanced arches. So let's talk about, someone who, are we doing okay on time, by the way? I don't want to keep you. Okay. So if we're talking about, someone who has done, let's say 100 very competent arches, and they've gotten themselves in a few situations where they say, you know what, I need to expand myself beyond my traditional all-in-4. I want to take on some more complex cases, or maybe I've had some issues with my own and I want some other things in my toolkit so I don't have to send this case down the road. Where should people be looking first? What kind of cases should they be looking at? I mean, personally, if I may be so bold, what I think is a great thing to start incorporating is pterygoids, right? Like that's once you start remote anchorage, it's great to be able to eliminate that cantilever in the back. It can be a little bit of ambitious at 100 arches. Maybe you want to be doing this around 250. What's kind of your take on once you start getting into that all-in-4 and beyond area? Where should people be starting?
I think it's really hard, I mean, I wasn't doing pterygoids until 500 arches.
Right.
And I know other people kind of share a similar sentiment, but just because that was my experience doesn't mean that it has to be somebody else's. And it's kind of like, how many cases do you want to compromise, and just be like, oh, I don't know, XYZ says I can't do it till I do 500 arches, right?
Sure.
So I do think 100 is probably like the minimal barrier, and I kind of say that in our Texas Implant Institute course. Like, I really want to limit, attendees unless they've done over 100 arches. Now, that being said, if you send me an email and you're super gung ho and you realize like, hey, this may be way over my head, and you want me to take your money, we will. But it's I think it's a better investment, doing it later. Maybe around the 250. I think most people would be like, all right, that seems relatively reasonable. But like I said, I mean, if you're willing to pay for 2 advanced courses. And I mean, to be honest, I mean, I've taken, 5 or 6 advanced courses, right? Like you're not going to stop, and there's not just one center that you need to go to. So anyways, I mean, I think, 250 is very easy. I think if you're an exceptional, human being and you're like, hey, I can manage a big bleed, I've, been around, I feel really confident, then fine, 100, have at it. But you better have some good hand skills. You better have some good thought processes, and you better have some good case selection on it. Probably what I would say, maybe just reach back there and kind of after you've taken a course, maybe not necessarily start placing pterygoids, but just on your fixed arch, on your all-in-4 standard, maybe just reach back there and drill, right? Like get used to the flap. Whenever I make my incision back there, I want to see the lateral pterygoid muscle, right? So go investigate that, go find that, go reduce back to the pterygoid plates. And then palpate the notch and say, you know what, I'm gonna just stick a drill back there, right? Don't go beyond 20, and because you don't know where you are, right? See if you can find all the hard bone. But take a course first, because if you're drilling back there and you go lateral, you'll be into the infratemporal fossa, and you can create a really big bleed. So. I don't want to just say like, just go drilling around. But if you want to start by saying, look, I've done 100 arches, I've done some education, I've taken an advanced course, I want to start getting into some pterygoids, that is not a bad way to go. And then the patient wakes up from surgery, and guess what? You got 2 pterygoids in there that they didn't pay for. And so probably your next, 10 arches that you're going to do pterygoids on, don't make the patient pay for them. Tell them you did something absolutely wonderful for them that was a $5,000 value, and they're going to be ecstatic and just say, hey, pay me back by going and telling 3 or 4 more patients to come here for their arches. So that's a way to kind of dip into it. Even yesterday, okay, I tried 6 times to get a pterygoid in on this lady. I couldn't do it. Okay, the guy that does pterygoids, I do at least 8 to 10 pterygoid implants a week. I still couldn't get one to stick. Okay, so it's going to happen. I've got credibility, or then we'll just opt for a zygo when that happens. But I can handle a patient who's like, oh, well, why didn't you do it? Why couldn't you get it? Right? Like, I tried, and if nobody else, and if I couldn't do it, nobody else could. But it's different when you're, so young, right? Like, then all of a sudden, oh, you didn't get the pterygoid to stick. Well, now what else is going to happen? Are all my implants going to fail? Right? So all of a sudden you start out on a terrible path with that patient.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. And one point I like to make as well, and you may disagree, is even when you are starting, there are some things you can start doing that won't compromise your cases or cause any issues that will help you already be practiced for some of those skills. Like you should always extend your incision line all the way back there, right? Like, you should be getting back there. Your alveo should be carried all the way back to your medial plate. You should have that habit no matter what. No one's going to be hurting from that. And don't be doing it for your first time when you're trying to get into a pterygoid, because those are some things that you can easily kind of screw up and make your job way harder. You could have been doing it from the very beginning. Have that same incision design. You don't have to change anything when you start doing pterygoids if you've been doing it that way the whole time.
Right.
Go ahead and extend it all the way. Get behind the heel of that tuberosity. Get very comfortable with that and extend your alveo back. That's a very good habit, even though you're not actually going to put anything back there in the very beginning. Go ahead and create that real estate.
Yep. And,
sure.
the other thing I would say here, going from 100 to whatever our next level is, maybe 1,000.
Sure.
I think here, this is when you're going to get better, or you're going to spend more time with your soft tissue, right?
Just slow down a little.
Yeah, like early in my career, I was like, hey, we did an arch in 28 minutes, Sure, it was flapless and it was brain guided. Doesn't take very long, right, to drill 4 holes. And I got to where I was doing, standard all on 4 in 45 minutes an arch. Well, so when you kind of start doing more, you now know better, and you're like, oh, okay, so some of these things that, we kind of flew past, now we're like, okay, well, that's a problem. We're going to navigate this way because it's going to bite me in the butt later. So then, your actual time spent on cases is actually going to go a little bit longer, right?
Yeah.
So certain things that I think that people are going to be getting into at 100 to 1,000 is going to be thinning your palate, doing tuberosity reductions, right? So you don't get those mustache bars or mustache prosthesis. Kind of doing like a distal wedge and managing your soft tissue better. You're going to be using like a soft tissue punch. You'll pull the tissue from the palate over the maxilla. You'll start using some transosseous sutures really to pull the tissue down. You'll be looking for cases, or you will now be saving all of your connective tissue that you harvest out of the palate. You'll save that because you'll know there'll be a number of cases that you're going to need it for the lower, and you can just at the time of surgery go ahead and attach that to the underside of your flap, and then now you've already done a epithelial connective tissue graft to augment around your posterior implants, because that is needed on quite a substantial number of cases, and it's obviously easier to do it at the time of surgery than it is to go back and down the road. So this is the phase where you're going to be doing more soft tissue innervation, and spending time doing a better job with your soft tissue. So trimming it better, it's going to approximate better. You're going to spend longer time on your suturing. Okay, I saw a case on Instagram the other day where somebody was like, this is an Instagram suture, it's perfect, nobody does it because you can't get your prosthesis on, and then they were like, this is mine, and it looked terrible. It was like 5 interrupteds and just like, I don't know, it looked like something out of the Stranger Things, and he was like, this is what I do every day. And I was like, no. Like my cases actually every day look like the Instagram thing you're talking about, because we're doing a special a running horizontal mattress, and then we overlay that with a baseball suture.
Two-step basically, or
very similar to two-step. I'll incorporate some lockings as we're actually doing our running horizontal mattress. I'll put in some lockings, but I mean, we were doing that before it had a name. But just because when you incorporate principles that you learn at my course, you want to evert your tissue, right? When you evert your tissue, and you can only do that through a mattress suture, now we have even more lamina propria, right? I think that's the correct histological term, right? That is touching, right? So we're going to have better wound healing. The other thing that we'll do is we'll make sure that we're spending time attacking areas that want to dive, right? So then all of a sudden, you can't expect the outer surface to heal to the inner, right? Like it's got to be lamina propria to lamina propria. So whenever I see an area that's wanting to dive, I'll kind of reattack that. I may then do like a running vertical mattress to even more evert that tissue, and then maybe I'll do a locking there to really kind of lock it up, or maybe go back and just trim that tissue more. Okay, so it's there's a little bit more of like, hey, I don't want to get into the the assistant calls me and they're like, hey, Dr. Damon, we can't get the temp down after surgery. There's tissue in there, right?
It's the worst.
So it's just heading all that off to where, at this stage in my game, I've rolled off. We're doing the next case when they're delivering the temp. So I'm not going to unglove and come back in. It's all got to work so that you don't create problems. And so it's seeing that. So it's like, hey, you know what? We're going to spend an extra 5 minutes here. We're going to get this right.
Yeah, definitely slowing down the front end can save you a lot more time in the back end for sure. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I think here too, there's a lot of you're in order to get that kind of watertight closure, right? Like the closure that you want, you need to be able to kind of eyeball how much tissue you're removing at your initial phase of your alveoplasty. So at least for me, like I'm quite a bit more careful now with like how much tissue I'm removing and what kind of tissue I'm removing. So when I do my closure, everything lays flat and really nice. I think during this phase 2, like that in the beginning, maybe like the 100 to 500 range, you are getting a lot better with efficiencies with your team. Your team is really, you should have a solid team in place at this point. They should know exactly what to do and when to do it. They should be handing you instruments at the correct times. You shouldn't be like reaching for instruments throughout the whole surgery, because this is going to just cause a lot of issues with efficiencies during the case. So you should be locked into the surgery the whole time, focusing on these things that Clark just mentioned, where proper tissue closure, right? Proper implant placement, maybe a parallelism throughout the arch on both sides, and getting these, instead of like getting the perfect case every 1 in 5 arches, it's like you're getting almost perfect parallelism every single case. And if you look at my cases now, it's like really hard to tell the difference between one case and another.
Right.
They look the exact same.
Yeah, and I would say it's not parallelism, it's symmetry.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, and also as you do more cases and you get better at this, you're going to be using less straight multis because you're going to want to angle all of your implants. So like if you look at this, implant case that we got behind me, most of those implants are angled at least, with 10 to 17 degrees in the anterior, and you actually get more. I can get a much better screw channel with an angled anterior implant than with a straight, right? Because if you just have a straight, then you have to check every single osteotomy, is it in the right spot, right? Because you only have basically 3 options, and one of them you barely ever will use. So really you only have 2, which is a straight or a 17. So I've got 2 degrees that I can change if I do a straight axial implant in the anterior. So every one of my cases that you will see, they are all angled, angled towards the crest and angled in the mandibular anterior. Now they're not 30 degree angled. They're 10, 15, 17 degrees. But then now I can easily, just through the changing the timing of the implant, then I can get a you
have more degrees of freedom.
Screw channel access.
I like that.
More real estate, right, to work with. So if one of your distal angled implants fails and you angle those anterior implants forward, you have a whole chunk of bone then that you can engage.
Yeah.
And hopefully you've done a pterygoid too, in this kind of range of cases, and you don't need to worry quite as much about that access coming out, in that molar area or in that second premolar area. If you got a pterygoid and you're coming out the first pre, you're still doing pretty good, and you'll be fine for the case as long as the pterygoid stays secure. I think another thing in this avenue of arches from the 100 to 1,000 is just less stress for your cases. I know when I was kind of in those first 100 arches, maybe I'd be a little bit nervous before the case. I just making sure I want it to go well. No unknowns coming up. And at this point, you've kind of went through a lot of these unknowns, and you've seen, you've hopefully fixed any of these cases that, the implants have failed, and you have a little more confidence going into the cases. And at least for me, it was definitely just it's more fun to be practicing this kind of dentistry when you're in this kind of avenue of arches, because you are a lot more skilled at it. And you have a better team in place. Your outcomes are better. The cases look nicer, and patients just leave happier. Thinner prosthetics, and I think it's much better for the patient.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the sweet spot, right? Because you're not seeing a lot of your long-term complications. You'll see those when you get beyond 1,000. They come in, and you're like, oh, that was an early one. I have never seen a nasal crest implant fail, so we'll just say that. I've seen multiple axial implants fail. I had a lady lose both of them. Luckily her distal angled ones were fine. We threw in some pterygoids, and it failed. Because with my technique is I engage the floor of the nose, the nasal cortex, and we're either right at it, we are through it, right? So we're typically level with the floor of the nose, and we lift the nasal mucosa. So we're and that's the technique that I teach. So you can see, right? So you're never, you see these horror cases where somebody's got them, 5 millimeters into the nose or something like that. So that doesn't happen because we have direct visualization. However, on the case that I had that failed, I mean, when I took the 2 implants out, I mean, we're looking at nasal mucosa by the time it's there. And so, being able to, use the advanced techniques is, really comes into play, beyond, 500 to 700, once you see, just kind of your longer term success. What I will say is, once you hope, if you're hoping an implant's going to work, it won't. Now, it may last 5 or 6 years, right? I mean, I've got plenty of cases where, literally, at 6 months there was maybe a millimeter crestal bone loss. Like, that's it. Once you get that, start the clock. Okay, you're going to be replacing that implant at some point. So I think it's better to do that sooner than later. I think it's better to do that before you've finaled the case, right? You want to keep your costs down. It really sucks when you gotta replace an arch, because an implant failed, but that's the game, right? So when things fail, you fix it and you don't charge them.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. If you have a failure of a case of a patient in a zirconia, do you have a timeline of when, let's say a implant fails under a zirconia arch 5 years down the line? Would you charge that patient for maybe like the lab fee of the zirconia or like the prosthetic fee or anything like that?
Nah, I wouldn't charge them a dime. The second you do, I mean, it's just, it's an uphill battle. I think, hopefully by then you've got 30 arches a month that you're doing, and so it doesn't matter, right? Mm-hmm. But I think ultimately just view that as marketing dollars, right? Like, if you treat one patient well, they're gonna tell others. You treat one patient bad, they're gonna tell 18 people, and so a lot of these, what everybody has to realize is, these patients, some of them are, they don't care what the financing cost is. I mean, I've seen them, basically say like, hey, I literally want this. My teeth are crap. I don't care what it costs. I don't care what the interest is. I'm sorry, but I've got to do a 10-year with Proceed, right? I've got to do, $600 a month. And, what's sad about that is $100 delta, right? Like if they paid $700, they could probably get it paid off in 7 years. But, when they get the financing paperwork, and I think what we don't realize is how much they're actually paying for it. They're not paying the $50,000 to us. They're paying $95,000 to Proceed, right? And so they're paying that for 5, 7, 10 years. And so I think what you got to realize is that patient is probably not even through paying for your services, and you're wanting them, to at least pay the lab bill. And so I just don't see how that is a practice builder, whatsoever. But I do think if you said like, hey, it's been, 5 to 7 years, sweetheart, I've got you covered, they're going to be like, holy crap. Like, I'm going to tell everybody to go see this guy because he's still taking care of it. He didn't do it the last other 2 dentists where when I got my crown and it broke in a year and they wanted to charge me again, right? Like, they've all been through this game. And so I just think, how would you want your mother to be treated, right? Like, if you're a non-dentist and this is your mother, would you really want your other dentist, charging your mom for a lab bill? Because, my lab bill may be cheaper. I mean, your lab bill may be cheaper than mine, but other people's lab bill may be $5,000 or $6,000. And I don't see that as like a reasonable thing. I think, when we get into this and we accept their money, this is a marriage, and I think you've got to say, hey, I'm going to take care of you, and I think that's what you got to do.
Yeah, for sure. Great points. I don't know if that's
so. Let's
hopefully a lot of other clinics. Yeah, hopefully a lot. But
I think that's more the exception than the rule.
Yeah, I wonder what some of the what clear choice and stuff like that is.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I know that they've got to be doing some significant refunds. I wonder what their P&L of refund amount is, because I have seen through my clinic, I've seen multiple patients be like, they had a bad thing happened, blah blah blah, and they're like, I'm getting a refund, and then they come back and see me. I'm like, did you get your refund? They're like, yes. Full refund, all across the board. And so, obviously they went down the legal path, and I will tell you, that to me is worth, whatever that lab bill is, just make them happy. And
sure.
So let's so at this point, 1,000 plus, you've going to be wondering, like, golly, when do I do zygos and stuff like that. And I definitely do agree. I think pterygoids is the first step. It was not the first step for me. First step. We all give credit to Dan, for compiling, the list and for him, writing the new pterygoid book, but also, 17, in 16, only avenue was to drill. There wasn't the osteotomes, and so that's how I learned, my pterygoid technique, and it was perfect. And writing the book, and so, so most people now will learn pterygoids, then zygos. I learned zygo and.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And shot up a bunch of water, and then now they got cellulitis, right? Because that's the one implant I'm not supposed to water pick. I water pick all these, but not this one, right? And then so they shot a stream up in there, and or you get OACs, and there's all sorts of stuff, so you've really got to be able to manage post-operative infections and complications, and you've got to be able to use long drills. You've got to be able to know your anatomy. When you get into these big zygo cases, you are really going to lose your reference points, and you're looking at different angles you're not used to for fixed full arch. You're kind of looking up, and instead of back, and you're placing your retractor here instead of just here. So But this is a good entry point, for your zygo education to get into zygos. Definitely there's not one course, there's not two courses. You're going to need to do 6, and you're going to need to do cadaver. You're going to need to do live patient. You're going to, potentially, now, Juan will fly into your office, and he'll sit beside you and watch you, be there, if you need him, doing some zygos. And so we are in such a good place now, where it's not the Wild West. Our tooling is better for zygos. Our zygos are better. The abutments are better. The drill sequences are better. Norris and JD have a good kit. I like the Neodent. I like the barrel burr that they have. I kind of incorporate the burr that they have. Los Aparicio's technique, where he kind of violins, nice approach. But you got to incorporate a little bit of Carlos.
Mm-hmm.
And it creates a nice little trough. And we're not doing these big holes in the maxilla. And so, literally, if you look at some of my zygo cases, and kind of the way we teach zygos is do a zygo like you're going to do it on your mom, right? So, basically drill a hole and fill it. That's it. So then when you look at the retracted cheek, you see beautiful, maxillary alveolus that is still virgin and untouched, and you got a zygo coming through it. So it's very conservative, very kind to the sinus. I think you start there. We're going to be winning. Also, with our zygos, we're really trying to get them into the first molar position. Really try to get them fairly far back and very low into your zygo. That way it sets you up for an A-frame technique when you go into your quad. The Brazilians really like a parallel technique, and it's like your AP spread's like 5 millimeters. So I think that's a problem.
Yeah, I also think in this, you're talking about kind of getting into zygo. It was like some great starter cases are the cases that you haven't been able to get. Like I have cases that I've had to do 6 revisions on, 5-6 revisions, because I haven't jumped into the zygo territory yet. But if I was going to jump into the zygo territory, it would be a single zygo, one side, just to fix that case that's been bothering me forever. It's not going to be a quad right off the bat.
Yeah. No, my first zygo case, I thought I could do a quad. It was absolutely nuts. We broke a screw off into the zygoma, and pros screw. It was a nightmare. It was one of the most stressful cases ever. So yeah, Aparicio says love yourself, and just do one.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you brought up a good point, right? Like, hey, I've got a case where I've done sinus lifting. We had a posterior implant fail, so we lifted the sinus. We did, buying room, lifting up the sinus, to add one, in like the first molar spot, let's try to do like a palatal root. Half the palatal roots don't work. They're short, and that bone, for whatever reason, that bone is just not very cortical, and so zygos in that instance, I think, are much more predictable and much more predictable than sinus lifting. I got referred a case by these guys that they had done like 5 or 6 interventions on this guy, and they were like, oh, I just don't want to uncover this guy and find out that the implants we put into bovine won't torque. And then sinus graft, they sent them to me. What do you think happened to zygos? And so he was out under general, backed those out at 5 Newton centimeters in and threw in 2 zygos, and the guy had posterior support with 1 surgery. He was like, I am, so thankful that I did not have to undergo multiple other rounds of revisions, or having his gum split open, and so that's the why, right? Why do advanced remote anchorage is to treat your patients better, right? Treat them like you would want to be treated and not have 5 surgeries, just to get some teeth.
For sure. Good. Well, I think we've gone over some great tips from 0 to 100. We kind of recapped those. 100 to 1,000, like we said, you're kind of in that sweet spot. You're cruising, probably not taking on crazy cases yet. Maybe not quite at your revisions from the cases that maybe weren't so great in the beginning. And then 1,000 plus when maybe you're tackling some of the zygomatic cases, a little bit more difficult cases. Maybe doing some stuff with like contraindications that you weren't doing before. I think this was a great recap going through all of the cases that the different chunks of where you should see yourself at clinically. I would love to get some questions from our listeners about, I think Clark is one of the most skilled surgeons that we've had on the show. And he can answer any of these questions that you guys might have about, okay, well, I've done 40 arches and I got this patient that came in that has been on, IV bisphosphonates. What do I do? So please send those our way. And Clark, I think we'd love to have you back on, just strictly answering some of our listeners' questions. What do you think, Tyler?
No, I think that's a great idea. I actually have a burning question that I want to ask before we let off, though.
Let's do it.
So I saw a thread very recently. I actually don't recall which group it was posted in or who originally asked it. And I think, Clark, you actually commented on this one. And I believe it was referring to mandibular flexure. And there had also been a comment about using retroforaminal implants and how that might actually have an increased incidence of complications resulting from mandibular flexure. Can you kind of speak to that? Is that something you've experienced? Do you think that does kind of increase the incidence of that? And if so, how do you handle it?
Well, I think it does exist. I think it's as simple as close your teeth together, and then now really give your jaw really engage those masseters. I can feel my teeth touch more. Okay.
There was more room. Yeah, something else happened there. Yeah.
So I the question there is, did we have PDL depression, right? Or did we have actual mandibular flexure? So, I don't really know. I would be in the camp of that's probably PDL depression, and we're just feeling more, and then the mandible really didn't flex. I do not, the beauty of having, me answer this question is, okay, I've been doing 6 on the mandible. We've been doing that since 2019. And so, at 300 a year, so I've got 1,500 patients. How many of them have received, complications, right? Okay, so what would the complications be? Fracture. My cases don't break due to that. And, if I do get a fracture, it's typically, because I do all zirconia. We have zirconia over zirconia. And if I see a fracture, it's typically a lab-caused fracture where I didn't, have it thick enough, or potentially, whenever they were contouring in the green state, they took one of those diamonds and they just got it too far. Typically, I see, if my stuff fractures, I'll see it around the canine. So, if mandibular flexure were real, I would see my posterior implants failing, and they're not. I've not replaced a single posterior implant. I would potentially see screw loosening. We're not seeing any screw loosening whatsoever. In fact, I see the opposite, right? So the opposite is, oh, well, let's just do 4. Well, okay, so you see screw loosening in 4, right? Like, so why do you think I switched, right? I switched because most of my patients did not want just 12 teeth, right? Most of my patients wanted more. And so, I still kept them at 12, but I'm able to make them happier with 6 and with 6 implants and 14 teeth. But if you leave your patient at 4, you're either going to underwhelm them, they're going to want, more teeth, or you're going to, be chintzy and then do a longer cantilever that you shouldn't. And so then what are you going to see? You're going to see screw loosening, and you're going to see tie bases. So to me, it's like, does mandibular flexure exist? I don't know. Do we see complications from it? I don't. Okay. Do I see complications from 4 in the front? Yeah, I do. Okay. And that's why a long time ago I said, screw this, we're going to do the 5th and 6th implant. We're going to call it the yacht implant instead of the boat implant. That's a joke, but because on the lower they're free, right?
Sure.
But so again, that's the reason that I got into 6 was to avoid prosthetic complications related to tie base debond or screw loosening. And then, I think this is a very interesting little segue here. I still do tie bases. Kind of the question is, well, why? Well, I want a point of failure, right? Like, okay, so if you don't have a tie base, so let's just say you have a bar, it's screwed onto the bar, okay? Where's your problem going to be? Your bar can fracture, or now your abutment can fracture, right? Or then you get into screw loosening, or then you're going to fail your implant, right? So I would prefer to have a point of failure at the tie base, and that is a really good indication. Hey, all your tie bases came out, and you just have 4, and you only had this for 6 months. Well, sure, you can re-cement your tie bases. Maybe it was, a bad cement job or something like that. But if it happens again, now this is a cantilever issue. This is a function issue. This is your patient's prosthesis telling you, I want no cantilevers. And so the second you go there, then now all of a sudden your forces come down, and everything is happy. But
I see.
I still use tie bases today because I want a single point of failure, and I want it at that bond junction. And guess what? Is that a big deal? No. Give us a day or so. We'll get them re-cemented on back for you, and you're back out the door. Yeah. But it allows us to then say, what happened? Let's re-torque all of our abutments. Let's find out how many implants you got. You got 4, you're going to get more. Okay, and I wouldn't charge on that. I would be going in and adding 2 more, and remaking their prosthesis at no charge.
Yeah. So in other words, that tie base is a sacrificial glass for you and a diagnostic for, okay, we need to change up the setup a little bit. It gives you that opportunity to do that without transferring those forces directly to the multi-unit and thereby the implant causing an even bigger problem.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. And
then now because I do 6, we have no tie bases coming loose.
Yeah, just because of the reduction of mean forces, or average forces. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Well, I think that Storm was trying to transition us, and I refused because I had some questions that needed to be answered tonight. But Clark, we've gone about 2 hours here, and we've covered quite a bit of ground, taking people from, hey, I want to do fix, to hey, what fix can't I do? I think you've done a really great job in illustrating that path and somehow condensing 12 very fast years of full arch into 2 hours worth of recording. And I think there's definitely a lot more that we can shake from this tree in a further session. But I agree with Storm that we should sort of give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions and bring out a few points that we may have glossed over just a little bit on our road to get here.
Okay.
So I think that's a great idea. Sounds
like a plan. We'll do it.
Yeah, we definitely reach out to us from our website, thefixpodcast.com. We put a lot of work into that, so you should be able to ask any questions you have on there. Reach out to us on Instagram, and definitely check out the Texas Implant Institute. Wonderful spot to get your first implant education around all-on-4, and then your next step education around zygos and pterygoids. So thanks so much, Clark, for coming on tonight, taking off time after a long clinical day, I'm sure. So we really appreciate that.
Okay. Thanks, guys. It's always fun. And, thanks for plugging the course. Like I said, check out texasimplantinstitute.com, and we've got some courses there for you. And soon we'll be getting the 2025 schedule up and going. Expect 2 full arch courses and 2 zygo courses for sure. So love to meet you guys.
See you next time at the Fix Podcast.
All right.